Now we're recording. Okie-doke.
You said if you wanted to see your screen, you have to do share screen.
Yeah, I guess I can do it that way. We'll just talk for a minute. Let's do it. All right, so I've never done it this way, teaching and not being at there, but we'll see how that goes.
Okay, all right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. If you'll see that today we're gonna start on feedback, our objectives, that we will review the different types of feedback statements, all right, and then practice giving appropriate feedback to match the tasks presented. So I'm gonna get to the different posters that are around the room, but before we do that, I do want you to pull out download B, okay? Download B. And I want you to read each one of those practices as they're related to feedback strategies. And then put, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. I feel confident with this, so I'm going to start. Or, yeah, there's some areas to improve. I need to work on this. And I want you to just select a little staircase. And then as you're going through, actually just maybe write down a couple of notes why you said what you said. Okay, so if you think you're proficient and you started, just write a little note saying why you said that. And we're going to debrief in just a little bit. So it'll take about 2 minutes. Fill that out.
Which one's which? My name.
Okay, the area of strength. This is going to be your star section, and that's going to be your stair section. And then just make a couple of notes to yourself. Yeah, one. Okay, finish that last one. Now, before we start talking about our answers, what do you notice about the title of this particular sheet? What does this one relate it to? Okay, it has a bit of assessment practice, and specifically, if you look underneath it, it says my performance assessment practice. So we're not going to use it as just a performance assessment, but also just thinking about your forward-looking practices overall. Okay, so to use kind of our discussion. All right, so let's just talk about a couple of these. Let's talk about maybe 2 areas that you feel like, yeah, I'm pretty good at, and then 2 areas some areas of improvement for you. Okay, so let's have Nicole. What's something that you feel pretty good about?
Honestly, I feel like I can improve on all of them, but like the one I felt like I was pretty good at was teaching the lesson that focused on one aspect of the quality within a performance assessment at a time.
Okay, so elaborate why you said that. Why do you feel like you're strong?
I just feel like if I know my students are weak in one subject or something, I can teach to that really well. I can like try to break it down and explain it to them better.
Okay, all right. And so are you saying that based off experiences that you've had in your classroom, or is this more of a, you feel this way? Like what makes you say that?
I base that kind of off of experience because in one of the times I went and observed, the teacher was like, hey, can you bring this group aside and work with them one-on-one? And so by having them work out a problem, I was then able to like analyze like, okay, this person needs help right here. Like they're struggling at the beginning of the problem. But this person right here can get the beginning, but they struggle with the end. So I can focus what I want to say to help get them to understand how to do the problem.
Okay, all right, that's great. So you're using just your experiences to track what's in this line. Okay, Kate, what was something you felt pretty good about?
Ask students to reflect on their own strengths and weaknesses using the rubric. And I ask the students to show examples if they do say that they do well with something. I'll say, well, on this, you can show where you do that.
Okay.
Or and then I'll say, control is also teach a lesson that focus on one aspect of quality within the performance assessment at a time. Just one experience in a classroom.
Sorry. Savannah?
I would say an area of strength would be sharing examples of strong and weak performance assessment pieces, and then having the students discuss why this was weak, why it was strong. Just like if they do a tick in the door, sometimes I'll gather them up and then I can choose a couple that need some help, like need corrections, and a couple not exactly right, and we can compare the two.
And having the students have a conversation.
Yes. Mhm.
All right, so Paul, what we're looking at is the areas of strength and areas of weaknesses or areas to improve upon with each one of these question prompts. Is there one that really stands out to you that you feel like, yeah, I feel pretty good about this particular practice?
I think number 7, that students track their own learning progress. Ms. Craven, she uses a interactive notebook for both math and science. And the more, every time I'm in the classroom with them, I think that's a good tool to use, because not only does the lesson, like the introductory lesson that they do, they take the notes and the activity and everything, and paste it into their actual folder, and they can go back to it at any time and look at it. So you can really see that their learning is based off of how well they're taking their notes and how well they're going into their putting in their work for their journal and so forth. So I think I would like that, and that would be an area of strength. Now that I've seen it over and over again, I could use it.
So not having used it yet, but your observations, you're making a prediction of. Okay, all right. So let's switch gears. What's something that you feel like, and if you have more stairways than you do stars, then let's not get all of them, right? Let's just pick maybe 1 or 2 there. Nicole, we'll start with you. What's an area that you feel like, yeah, I definitely need to work on it maybe this semester as I'm doing my student teaching?
Basically, all the ones that uses rubrics, because I don't really use rubric.
Okay. Well, and hopefully you will after you get finished with this class, because we are going to spend some time talking about how to set up a rubric and how to use it appropriately, right, depending on what standard or what concept or content that you're teaching. Okay, so not feeling comfortable with rubrics. All right.
Engage students in creating a revision plan based on the set film that can improve product performance. I don't tend to work with students on a revision plan. That's something I really need to.
And again, these are things that we're going to work on. You haven't been asked to do them yet, so it makes sense that, okay, these are some things that I feel maybe that I'm not as comfortable with yet. Okay, so
I'm kind of along the same lines as Nicole, just using the rubric. Whenever I've told the students what I expect, you know, you need to share A, B, and C. I need to see that, but as far as like a written rubric, I don't really understand.
I don't really understand how, like, if you give them, I don't know, homework or something, and they're having to figure out problems and stuff in math, how you could use a rubric for that, because either they have it right or wrong.
Okay,
But that's what I'm kind of, I don't know how a rubric could tie into math unless you actually sit there and do a project where they have to create something. Does that make sense?
sure. Other things to think about too, when you build a rubric as it relates around math, maybe they're not just having to figure out a problem. Maybe that's the proficient piece, but in order to get exemplary, they have to create their own problem based on whatever it is that they're looking at. Does that make sense? So not only do they now have to solve it, but they have to actually come up with their own that's similar in, you know, the style or similar in the outcome, right? And so that creation piece, just to see, all right, that's going to definitely put them above, right? Or even adding the explanation piece, explaining how they got into the experience. That could be somehow you could build a rubric on that. And we'll talk more about that this semester too. All right, and Paul, what's an area that you feel like, yeah, something I need to work on?
Showing examples of weak performance assessment pieces,
Okay.
or having students, well, it's not really using the rubric, but really just showing the weak performance assessment, because I've had, 2 lessons, and within these 2 lessons, I've had performance assessments.
Mm-hmm.
I've shown the strong work, to really encourage that, but I guess I need to also show bad examples, or examples that maybe students, you need to put a little bit more effort or put a little bit more of the information that's correct into it. So probably showing more examples, sharing more examples of assessment pieces.
And are you sharing the examples before you actually do it, have the students do the work too? Okay, yeah, that's good. So just as you're modeling what you want them to do, you can also model what's called a non-example, right? And so that way they can see, and you can even have discussions around, before you get into your lesson, that maybe because that's a strategy you're looking at. Okay, why is this an example of what I'm looking for, and why is this not? And then having the students discuss and begin to uncover that for themselves, right? But those are things definitely you can practice this semester when you're working with your teacher. Okay, so kind of put that to the side. We will do something similar to that at the end of class. But today we're talking about feedback, providing students with effective feedback. Okay. This is what we've talked about this last semester. So again, we're just doing more broadening and deepening your understanding of feedback. Okay, take a second to read that. And then I want you to share with me what is your understanding as a result of this particular quote. Okay, let's do this. If you will, Katie, if you'll slide over next to Nicole, we'll have you guys work together and just kind of switch it up a bit. And then Savannah, just take maybe about 1 or 2 minutes and talk about what is your understanding of this quote?
Impacts the students' performance and then it helps improve understanding like innovation. Use of words that are given to students to help them know their understanding of their entities. Whether it's maybe they just need more different cues and clues or something.
Alright. Here's a question for you. What's the difference between objective description of a performance and an evaluation of a performance? What's the difference between the two?
Evaluation is kind of final. It's the description just kind of tells us what's going on. Evaluation uses the information and makes a decision based on what has gone on. Okay.
So like an evaluation is like, if you're looking at it from like a grade or feedback, an evaluation is a grade.
Okay.
While this objective description is words that are used to help a student learn.
Sure. And what if I said something along the lines of great job? Okay. That's not necessarily a grade, but what is that? We're going to talk more about that. Yeah, it's an evaluation. It's how you're interpreting the student did on their work. You're saying they did a great job, right? Versus if I'm asking for an objective description of the student's performance, what constitutes a great job, right? So writing out what they were able to hit on the task as it relates back to, the learning objectives, learning outcomes. But what were they not able to hit? Okay. Good. All right. Just a little bit of background information before we jump into this. Research. Well, we always talk about, what's the importance of research, right? It shows that it is a very integral part of having a conversation with your students, between the student to student and the teacher to student. So if students are able to get to the point where they can provide qualitative feedback to each other, that's going to help to improve their performance, because now they're not only getting it from each other, they're not only getting it from you, but they're also getting it from each other. Does that make sense? Okay. All right.
I like a little piece at the end there that said between the student and him or herself, also being able to give feedback on their own. Also, it's like not a self-evaluation, because that's an evaluation, but being able to give self-feedback.
How can we get to the point, because that is optimal teaching, right? In that not only are you providing it, your peers, the students' peers are providing it, but they can do that. They can provide feedback for themselves. How do we get to that point?
Constantly modeling it, and then showing. You can even show the students how you could give feedback on your own, on yourself as well.
Okay. What else? And so modeling is a piece in helping the students to be able to do that for themselves. What else is important for them to know?
The correct answer. Or the correct.
Yeah, keep going with that.
The problem.
Okay.
If they get something wrong and they don't know what they did wrong, then they can't evaluate themselves.
Okay. All right. So they have to know, and almost, I'm going to take yours, I'm going to frame it a little bit differently. They have to know the outcome, right? They have to know the end goal. And that's why we constantly talk about your objectives. Do the students know what the goal is for the lesson? Because if they know what the goal is, then they can maybe navigate it to get there themselves. All right. If they're supposed to know how to add and subtract, unlike denominators, right? And obviously their answers aren't lining up. Well, they've got to be able to figure out, all right, where is the misconception happening? Where is it not lining up? Because that's where I got to get to, right? All right, good. Hey, thanks. Go
To
ahead.
do the student-to-student feedback, could you maybe like one day do a ticket out the door, and then have the next day have all of the ticket outs the doors posted on the smart board or something, and go one by one, and have the students correct?
You absolutely could do that. That's a strategy, right? So now you're thinking about, all right, how can I incorporate instructional strategies? Now, would that be the best use of your time? It might not be, right? Because if you're going through, depending on what that ticket out the door is, and you're having every single person go through every single one, all right?
Well, I mean, that's like a group had to put on the smart board, and like,
Okay, how many students are in your class?
like 15, 16.
15 or 16, okay.
We
And
just
so-
got new students, so.
Okay, so that could, if you have the time and it was conducive, that might work. If you don't have the time, that may not be the best use of your time management. But how could you take that idea and modify it?
But you could group like errors or similar errors,
Mhm.
and just have maybe one or two out of each of those that have similar errors, and just have the students errors those.
And then that ties back into what Paul was saying as far as being able to, an area of growth for him is looking at correct examples versus non-examples, right? So now you're looking at what makes this correct and what makes this not correct, and having the students have discussion, right? That's great. Good thinking, guys. I like that. All right. So what is feedback? Take a second, read these 3 paragraphs, and just have a conversation about that with your peer.
Feedback should go.
Maybe not do more negative feedback.
For us to give you feedback. More constructive, like not showing.
Let's look at this last point. It says, and effective feedback allows us to tap into powerful means of not only helping the students learn, but helping them get better at learning. What is that saying? What is your understanding of
That it should also, that feedback should also encourage. It's not just a.
So tell me how you got to encourage. How did you get there from that one?
And effective feedback allows us to tap into a powerful means of not only helping students learn, but helping them get better at learning. So to me, encouragement comes from helping them not just learn, but making them want to get better at learning. Because it's up to the student to what they pick up from the feedback.
And what in that process, Paul, is going to help them to get better at learning? She said, I'm not Paul, but Paul want to phone a friend. There you go. I lost my train of thought. Okay. So Savannah, talk about that when you said, yes, providing feedback, but the helping them get better at learning. What is that? I think Paul's on to something. I think you're on to something as well.
I think the helping students learn, that's the end result, but helping them get better at learning, that's the process of getting to the end result.
Okay.
And so by giving effective feedback and scripted feedback, you help them in the process or in their process of getting to the end result.
And then hopefully, because feedback, and we've looked at before and we'll look at again, is that feedback helps the students to begin to understand where the misconceptions lie and to begin to lessen those errors, right?
And we can also help the teacher
Mhm.
by like, if when you're providing feedback, you know, like, oh, this student struggled with this concept. Well, if you think about back of your teaching, the way you taught that concept, maybe they're not a learner that learns best that way. So you can change up your instructions.
And then also that can be very encouraging, right, Paul? If they're getting better at learning how to identify those misconceptions and having that regular feedback, then they are going to be better, and that's an encouragement. Whereas if I got it wrong again, oh man, I got it wrong again, and there's no indication of how to get better, right, from the teacher, then that can be very discouraging for a student. Okay. Timely manner, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Feedback focus, for the purpose of today, we're going to talk about academic feedback focus, but just give me a quick brief, I guess, statement, if you will. What do you think it means, feedback focus that's directed towards behavior? We're not going to spend a lot of time.
Using those I am statements, I'm appreciative of y'all's behavior as far as y'all were on track. You have, just like academic, you have your bulletins almost of what's going to happen, your behaviors.
Okay.
Just like we were talking about in tomorrow's class,
Mhm.
behaviors and so forth. You got to have those objectives, just like you do academic, to have your students reach those goals
Mhm.
of performance.
Sure. Katie, did you want to add something to that?
I see it back, I lost it.
Okay, all right. So again, we're going to talk about academic behaviors, but just like you have certain targets, academic behaviors, academic goals, right? We're going to have certain, you'll have certain targets for your behaviors as well. That's why we have our classroom management plan, right? Because we want certain behaviors to happen in our classroom. But we're not going to focus on that as much today. Okay, we'll keep going. All right, just some numbers for you. That bold section, when feedback and corrective procedures are used, and I want to talk about that word in just a minute. Most students can attain the same level of achievement as the top 20% of students. Okay, and so we probably need to dig into that research to see really what does that number mean? How did that come about? But I want to focus on this. When feedback and corrective procedures are used, what are corrective procedures? What do you think that means?
Being able to apply the feedback that you've given the students.
Mm-hmm.
So for the student to be able to take what you've given them, apply that and to their learning.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. And giving them opportunities for those. All right, so now here's my feedback to you. So now I'm going to give you an opportunity to either try it again or do another assignment that's going to build off of that, right?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
What did it mean when it said students can attain the same level of achievement as the top 20%? Is that grade wise or improvement wise?
And see, we would need to look at what the numbers are saying, right? Going down, looking more as far as what's broken down. As the top 20% of students, I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that for you right now. I'd have to go look at their research and go on a blank. But it's a good question. All right, I'm gonna keep going. All right, so power of accurate feedback, immediate impact on results, all right? So if you're getting regular feedback, you're gonna be able to produce better results. Lower failures, better attendance, fewer suspensions. Should say suspensions, yeah. Suspensions, there we go. I was thinking that wrong. So fewer suspensions, failure to undermine every other effort in the curriculum, assessment, and teacher, okay? So, and teaching. All right, so characteristics, and then we'll look at some again. Take a second, read that with your partner, and just see if you can have what that means to you, these characteristics of feedback.
Information is already done in the process, and they still get in the back of the room, so it's part of the activities. Right, or even, or is it being able to thinking about like and then what you should be ready for. So they don't think that it's
They have to try to apply it.
It needs to be around students to so they can, in the learning process, break up the order. So they know
Where to choose something like this, try to use the.
on that, it's like they have this also reasons are going to give it specific criteria to try and carve it from.
Why did you choose?
And it just analyzing based on what you
Why did, you know?
want them to be served in. So, and I'm not jumping into one of the things you're asking a lot of questions, right, as far as. So, I'm going to, so I'm going to be
So I guess my first question is are those, her questions there meets?
When they have some, so try to ask over here. And then when
But
they
yeah,
bring it down again,
you use your questioning
they forget the name.
within your
That's not-
feedback
In
to get,
the.
it's like a collaborative feedback
Because we're home, it's gonna be.
because you have to have that question answered, and then maybe another question. Kind of deal, where it's almost an international. Say for instance, you jumped in, you asked me that question. That question's almost a feedback, it means I'm on track. You
Because they're not
get what I'm
gonna
saying?
get that.
So, well, and I'm going to come back to that. I want to hear your answer first in 2 seconds.
Okay,
That was
I'm
small,
thinking
like,
that your questioning can
should make encouraging.
lead some way with volunteer practice.
Like,
I was going to say, is the actual act of asking a question the same thing that the test now?
No.
No, right, good. But you're using, the way you're using that question technique is so that way you can get feedback from students, so they can provide feedback.
It's
So it's almost in yourself, there's almost especially in case of there's some things that maybe you want to clarify, or you want to make sure that your students have clarified, so you ask the question. So that way that can challenge your answer, right? Because you're asking a question, an answer that's either valid, invalid, or I'm not really sure. Yeah, and then there's someone that just asking me one. And then at that point, I'm going to have some small groups. I have not said it. It's one of these small groups. I don't have some question. The questions, that's not something you can agree. That's also used to use appropriate response. That's really feedback. That's right. If I say, good job, little Johnny. Good job, little one. Yeah. Good job. I said it's still not specific. What did I do on this? What did Johnny do? Since that was good. Johnny, good job. Listen, you can't go last from first letter. Or you put a punctuation in specific. So I know exactly what you're doing.
It's almost, you want to specific to the student.
Okay, no, that's saying sentence. Learning today.
Got it on.
We were focused on.
Why they're doing that.
First letter of sentence,
Or actual.
punctuation, and you've done exactly that. And running the goals in the last two. Specific, right, student learning, and personal observation, needed to learn. And it's encouraging.
All right, so I'm gonna pause here. We're gonna go on for time, because of time in just a minute. But before I go there, I asked this group a question. I want to share this for you as well. What is, well, when we ask a question to our students, is that the same thing as providing feedback?
It can, no.
No.
No, but you can provide feedback and follow up with a question to help them, to give them a chance to apply the feedback.
Okay. All right. Nicole, anything you want to jump on there?
I think it depends on how you word the question. So if you ask them a question, they got it right, and then you're like, well, then what? I mean, that in my brain, when you say, then what? Yes, I got that right, so then I can go on to the next step. I think it depends on the question and how it's worded.
Okay. All right. And so, Paul and Savannah, what was your understanding of that?
Questioning was not feedback. You can use questioning to gauge student understanding, but in descriptive feedback, you don't use questioning to get feedback.
Paul,
They
is there?
aren't the same.
And what was your point?
To make it effective, you don't use questioning, but questioning can be collaborative. The questioning is almost an on-journey feedback, where you have your question, you receive an answer, and then you can make your end statement, your final feedback statement.
So when we were chatting over there, something I just shared with them, the question in and of itself is not feedback, right? It's going to help the students. You're probably asking that because you're wanting them to think more about whatever that topic is, right? But you can use that as an avenue of later providing specific feedback. Because if they're not understanding a concept, you ask them a question, well, what about looking at it this way? Then that allows for the student to answer you however he or she chooses. And then you jump in and provide that feedback statement. So it kind of is a collaborative effort, if you will. Does that make sense? But the question in and of itself is not exactly actually feedback.
Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So last semester, oh, that was supposed to block that out. I didn't want that. Well, I had that blocked out on my site. Yeah, I didn't really pass. Sorry about that. But the one I wanted is not up there. Interesting. All right, well, we'll keep going then. What were let's see if I can remember the board. I'm going to use these here. What were the feedback statements that we learned about last semester? Do you remember them? There were some very specific kinds, like individuals. Okay, so we had individual. We had, what else? Class. Okay, and group. Okay, so that was one. That was specific. General versus general. Congruent. Incongruent. Congruent versus incongruent. I'll define these in just a minute. Okay, what else? Evaluative versus corrective. Good. All right. One more. Positive, negative. Yes. There you go. All right, so let's quickly define those. What's the difference between individual, class, and group?
Individual is very specifically one person.
Okay.
The class is all of the students, and then like group, you might have the class separated into different groups, so you talk to them as a group.
All right. So specific versus general.
Specific is about one topic or one thing or one task on those.
Right. Versus general.
Good job.
Good job. Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of just a global statement, right? Very good. All right. Congruent versus incongruent. That's the one that was the toughest with us last semester.
Congruent goes back to the learning target.
So what, in order for us to provide incongruent or congruent feedback statements, what do we have to have? The knowledge of the task, right? The knowledge of the objective. So we and the students have to know the task, the objective, the goal, all right? And so what was incongruent?
It's about a task that's not related to the specific learning goal or maybe future learning.
Yeah, and is it important? Yes. Yeah. So our incongruent statements, they could be very specific, right? Going back to that specific versus general, they could be very specific to a particular task, but it's not what the outcome of the lesson is supposed to be. All right. How about evaluative versus corrective?
Evaluative is just kind of a blanket, good job, great sentence, great paragraph.
It's your judgment, right, on the student's behavior. The students, when I say behavior, what it is, not their physical behavior, but behavior of learning versus corrective. What was that?
You tell them how they can fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we tell the students how they can fix it and improve for future learning, right? So this is how they're fixing for future improvement. All right, and the last one. Paul, tell me about positive versus negative.
Positive versus negative. Positive is more along that you did these sets of you did these problems well, good job overall, awesome artwork, stuff like that. Negative, you got such incorrect. You didn't do the whole process right. It's more of those, the positive versus negative statements really judges how you're placing those evaluative and congruent and general, all those different types within positive and negative.
So it's really a way we frame it, isn't it? So these are written in the affirmative and these are not. Right?
So if you say you need to work on this, would that be considered a negative? If you're telling them
I'm gonna throw that back to you guys.
I think it's positive because it's not, you're not saying this is wrong.
Okay.
I think in the statement it's negative
Okay.
because it needs to. Say your sentence again.
Like, if you need to work on whatever the topic is.
Yeah, it's not really positive because you're not saying you did these well or something. You then just go along and just you work on these. It's more negative because you don't have any positive factors in it to me.
Now, if you don't have, the way you frame it with your tone, that could be a good indication of whether it's positive or negative. That statement in and of itself really doesn't fall into either category because there's not anything that's written in the affirmative or the negative. Your tone may be a good indication of where it's gonna fall, right? Like you really need to work on these, right? Yeah, and so that was negative, right? And how did you know that? Oh, right, your tone versus, well, you.
And the gestures.
I'm throwing my hands, right? One student last year, he said, okay. Didn't know that. All right, so we're gonna use this to kind of transition into our next activity. What I've got is 3 stations around the room for you. At each station, you're going to look at some sample work. This one, I'm gonna come to this one last because it's a little bit different. So I'm gonna start over here, so just turn your body this way. Oh, this may look familiar from before. But you're going to have, so this is going to be a 2-part activity. The first part is you're actually going to write feedback statements on this particular paper. Okay? So you're going to write negative, positive, negative, corrective, congruent statements. This is a 3rd grade writing prompt. You have the task available to you. You also can see how the students, there are 3 sample works. You can also see how the students were graded, all right? But now it's your job to provide feedback statements. As you're doing that, I also want you to just write down some general observations that you have, just about either the types of sentences that you're writing, some of the work that you see, how does feedback play a role, okay, just some general observations for this one, okay? This one, you're gonna come over here, all right? Same idea. You are going to write feedback statements. These are 2 lesson plans that were turned in, not from this year. So be relieved, it's not yours, right? These are 2 lesson plans, older work that I want you to look back and I want you to write some feedback statements on, okay? And then, same thing. What are some observations that you have? What are you noticing based on the type of feedback statements that you're writing? Are you seeing some themes? Are you seeing some misconceptions? Are you seeing where they're doing something really well? Okay.
Are they about the same person?
Yes, so all that is the same, all of these are the same. So that way you can have conversation if you end up working with someone. Okay.
I mean, the 2 lesson plans. Are they all the same person?
Okay. It's the exact same one. This one's a little different. Okay. We're going to spend more time, I think in a 3 weeks maybe, actually looking at whole class data. So those are going to be individual students. This is going to be your first attempt at looking at a set of class data, okay? So you will see that this was a test, a post-test that was given to a 6th grade math class, numbers and their opposites, okay? The standards that they were assessing are down here. And then what I've done is I've highlighted what those standards are, okay? Then I want you to look across here. Every time you see a 1, that means they got the answer correct. If you see a 0, they got the answer incorrect. Okay? This is going to be a little bit harder for you because you don't have access to the actual student's work. So I want you to begin to make some observations at this class data about some possible, maybe just some overall observations, and then what might be some feedback you might provide for the class or groups or small groups if you see certain students are emerging similar patterns. Does that make sense? So give this a go, just try that one. This is going to be something that we're going to talk a lot more, I think in like 3 weeks, but to start with. We'll just kind of just play around with it a little bit, okay? So what I want us to do is we're going to spend probably about 5 minutes at each one, and then we'll rotate through, okay? and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna have a conversation. So be prepared to talk on any one of these because you might be the expert that's gonna share out on this, on your topic, okay? All right, so is there anyone that you're just dying to jump and start at one?
Okay.
All right, so Katie wants to start here. All right, any others? Paul's going for it. Take your pen with you, Paul.
All
Maybe
right.
you're right on your sheet. And Nicole and Savannah, you got any takers there?
I got it.
All right, so Nicole, that means you jump in on another one, whichever one you want to jump in on. Okay?
I'll just follow.
You might want to go with a non-math person. Okay, all right, so let's take about 5 minutes looking at those. Remember, if you have a two-parter task, you're gonna have to start writing feedback statements on yours, and then I'll do some overall observations.
So does this mean these people are going to stay here or what? So if there's a one, they made a 7 year ago, there's a 0, they did not make a 7 year ago.
This page is here, so this is the time what I was students work on. That's how they're from those things. There's not in response to what you're seeing.
Three, how to use that though, I would. 7. But with the question, you can.
Oh, right. Okay, so that's what you're going to question. So, 18 is probably a bad question. Hold on. 18, 20, 18, 18. It's just 0.
I consider that question in English just a bad question because if you look at all the other questions based on those standards, it's questions 8 through 12, 15, 19.
Yeah, so 8 to 12.
Like 8 on the shading got it right.
And then 15, 18, and 19.
I would love to see
So let's just put our observations of the class. Like, we feel like 18 is just a question. Right? So yeah, you can write that. Do we need to go file? Yeah. Or just be prepared to talk about it. Or be prepared to talk about it. Probably, or just put what's that bad question.
I would just put 11 right on it.
What was probably?
No, no, you're the English person.
You communicate a bad question.
So, yeah, it's like you're the assistant teacher, right? And you're doing this person feedback.
Okay.
Well, that's one question under that standard. Here, let's see it come down. And then.
good grasp of it, not like I'm saying, whether or not they have that standard. That's one reason.
Have you looked at the standards too? I haven't
one
what
that
they are looking at.
To see if maybe there's something you can provide feedback on because of the standard.
English compares to actually saying throughout the book. Alright, yes.
That's one of the observations that you can make just as a result of versus lesson plan.
More description.
And
of
questions. Now they're having to be trouble comparing what the importance of the things they have to actually guide here. And it's also a understand absolute value.
So maybe just write down some of those observations here overall. And out of that, actually writing out that process.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What are some things that are coming up for you, just for some actually writing?
Kind of takes me back to my own lesson, and so like right now I have, you know, the 3 different parts to the check.
18 and 13.
Does it finish?
So
there's grading one for peers, because this is
Okay, so that's one different. It should show they're having a problem with the standard, but that's something that's same for. Yeah, but either they're having a problem with comparison, or they're using their sample for this. Question.
I would want to say maybe.
Okay, so maybe about 2 more minutes. All right, so while she's writing that, what were you guys discussing? Just one second, what's that?
Question 20. That was the only question for this standard.
Okay.
So we're thinking maybe either it wasn't a big enough of a sample, and they needed more questions.
Okay.
Or they're having trouble with the comparison part. Because it was comparing absolute values from statements about what the word. So why maybe they're having trouble with comparing statements and sentences.
Okay, that is good. All right, finish that last thought.
I would be more cool, so somebody else doesn't trip over it. I would be the one to trip over it.
So just look at the leaders here and the words and calls. And then Savannah, when you're finished, you'll rotate up for Katie and Cole one. And then, yeah, leave that over there. We can always look at it. It's okay. So just let your materials rotate to your next station. Okay. So Savannah's already written some information down here. Feel free to look at that and use it as your writing out feedback statements. We've already finished writing down some feedback statements, what were some overall observations that you had just as you were writing.
So we're writing all this.
So you can write on that, and then as you're writing down those particular feedback statements here, okay, then begin to just what are some observations that you're getting as you're writing. Not about the seed, about the content, but yeah. You have the task, you have the student work, and how they were graded, so how would you respond to feedback? Selective response criteria. Yes, okay. Sure. That's me, and motivation sources.
These,
Those are the standards.
what is it? I'm teaching this stuff.
There you go.
For that student, yes.
Oh, wow. So this is not really showing Harry's internet resources. This shows it's from. Okay. This and it shows words. Okay, so there's something positive. Okay. Oh my gosh. This is really people use points. You can say good job on the words are used. Used for words and yes. Is there an acid in the words? This is it. I don't want negative feedback. It's not nothing. You can talk about their spelling. Is this supposed to be on different sizes, shapes, and colors? Yes, shapes and colors like purple, black. If they that's colors, do they say anything about shapes throughout it? Yeah, shape, essentially. But and shape needs to be flipped. And even. Okay. You did not. You do better next time. Do you want us to maybe reference is it wasn't in a written statement? There's not a way to decide. There's not a way to determine the time. You can tell if that's written in the record. So by putting in that not or no. There's no. This is hard.
Well, we can break down the freedom. So look at the task. And did they not, I mean, because
We did not include enough information for their resources.
there you go. Okay, I got one more minute. So Katie and Nicole, if you will transition to writing down some observations. Just as you were writing, there's some things that are coming up for you.
Is this the same student author here out of curiosity?
Yeah.
Different students.
Students. So this is also informational piece. So that's a persuasive piece. Okay. But look at it. Okay, type from. You may not get to it. right, start finishing your last thought.
Okay, if you want alteration. I'll put the reservation hours.
And then if you will, go ahead and rotate to your next station. Katie's going to finish this now, but you can grab one of those papers. So Nicole, do you want to slide on over while she's finishing that up?
Okay.
If there's something you want to talk about, then she might want to. Oh, this one.
Yeah. No, those are the.
Everybody's options are the same, at the same time.
Yeah, I don't kind of use the color thing. So these two people actually kind of like.
Once you take a second and look over and how the chart is created.
So maybe they need to find, you said, write on paper, paragraph, here's some questions. They. I don't know if that's better for him or not, so. Little young for me.
So then the first two are informational writings. So this is all informational. This is all informational, and this is supposed to be persuasive. So the task, the students will however rated, and then your feedback statements.
What type of alteration did you want?
Alterations, yeah, about either process statement or, what was something that knew was coming up for you, that you would write this out.
About how the process data is?
Mhm.
Or-
Yeah. And the Excel sheet, does it make sense how it's laid out?
Yeah.
So it's going to see that selected response, written response, selected response. So keep, I want to see, after doing this one, I want to see what you think, as it goes back to that state.
Hey, it's my first start credit.
My head discussion room is very sharp. Yeah, they're very sharp. Sorry.
I'm confused.
I'm not really, we're good. So one thing I noticed, everyone's like trying to be good. Right on here, and all of them. So, the first thing I said, there's none of prerequisite skills listed. So this was given, the resources and the resources.
I think it's online stuff,
I also said, like, if someone new or like a silver someone comes in, they might not know what that means. The first time, just got that out, and then this happened yet.
This one, this is how they were rated, right? There's no
So what does that mean? What do we do? So like in this area, we didn't want anything to be,
Okay, for an address is on the assessment.
but when they say things for address, that can be the title of their assessment. Because sometimes I'll be like if I'm given a homework, I'll title it as something. Does that make sense? So when they say Gettysburg Address, they might not mean the actual Gettysburg Address, that might be the title of their.
Date the year and things. We would have that. That's all we want to see if it has a title. So that is, if it is the title of the assessment, it's wrong here. So. I don't know why this is easier. This is really good.
There's no, you're supposed to know your mom, there's no single focus. Does everybody have their supposed to be a central focus on this?
Okay, let's take one more minute. We're running short on time. So, yeah.
I don't care. Are you happy now? Okay. So, Alright, so it needs to be having definitions, like it just says keywords, but it doesn't have the actual definitions of the keywords. Is that
About 30 seconds.
Which function? Like, yeah, that's supposed to be one verb, but iterations. Did they get a rubric before they run those?
Not on the,
One verb.
not when they do their,
One verb.
in the course, in their contract. They will get it throughout the process, like throughout the year, so they're familiar with it, but they don't have it right at the end.
It has no name.
We're gonna finish that last thought.
It doesn't have their assignments that they use in the lesson.
They probably want to fix these photographs.
So like, you know how you're supposed to upload.
All right, if you will just have a seat where you're at, just at that section, we're gonna do a little bit of talking about each one of those. First thing that I wanna go back to is why do we? So let's think about this now that you've had an opportunity to practice with feedback. Why do we give feedback? To help a student, right? To get to those learning outcomes, to improve their learning, right? So again, here's some different ideas that we need to focus on as we're sharing feedback with our students, okay? But I want you to think, is it easy or hard? Like, which one of these do you gravitate towards when you're providing feedback?
Positive, providing, general.
But do you? Look back at that one. Look back at that, the lesson.
This is very specific. This is individual. This is.
What did most of you write? You said positive, evaluative, right? But what were most of your comments framed in that way?
Negative, because we were actually looking for something wrong instead of looking for the correct.
Okay. So maybe it's the way we approach it, right? It's going to depend on how we frame our understanding of the task. Is going to depend on how we write it, right?
I just have an
Okay. So do you want to share with the rest of us, or do you want to?
Maybe the way that we're approaching this is the way that we see ourselves turning our lesson plan. Maybe we see whoever's writing our lesson plan as immediately looking for something wrong with it.
Okay, that's interesting, Katie, just to look at it from your perspective as a student. Yeah. I think sometimes when there's a lot of errors, we tend to go here, right? When there's a lot of things that need to be corrected, we tend to go here. So keep in mind, we want to have a balance, right? We want to have a balance of both of those. Let me jump ahead a little bit. Okay. So you want to do something positive, right, with that one. And it's hard because there's a lot of gaping errors where you're like, wow, this student really needs a lot of assistance.
So definitely we're probably gonna have some, you did not have this, you did not include whatever. But then actually tie it back to some type of congruent feedback statement, right? And to make it, to earn that corrective piece, corrective congruent, where they know how to get to the task. Maybe that person that's trying to turn that in, maybe they really don't know how to do it, they really thought that they did well with that. So if we just write, there's no this, there's no this, there's no this, but don't every now and then provide some examples, how will they have an opportunity to get to that correct feedback or correct outcome? Does that make sense?
And another thing with the whole positive and negative feedback, you have to be careful on what student you're saying that to. Because if you know a student that doesn't do well with negative feedback, you might have to rearrange the wording to make it positive and have them learn something.
Okay. What any other ones that really jumped out for you? Because I see a lot of observations. I think some of the same things you guys are getting all across here. What are the other observations as related to the lesson plans?
Just the amount of detail was extremely lacking.
Are you talking about what they're used, or you talk about their description of what they did or what they're going to do?
Are you asking me or
Yeah, I'm
asking
asking
Nicole?
you.
As far as, all right, ask me the question again.
All right, ask your question again.
Yeah, I didn't understand what you're saying.
No, ask your question.
Sorry, what observations were you making about that? What were some observations overall as you were looking at
Just, okay. Then my question was just overall on it? Okay. That they didn't use any references or resources.
that? Okay.
And how are you going to use how are you not using references or resources?
So probably the way you would frame that, to provide them with feedback, you would provide them with some type of congruent, specific, corrective feedback, right? To help them get to, because that maybe they don't know. So maybe you say, all right, here's an example of how to cite the Gettysburg Address, because I think you mentioned that they're pulling that up, right? If they're using a primary source or something along those lines.
Now, could you use questioning to get to, say you get this and you have no idea what's going on at this point, you're kind of looking at it going, I don't even know, because this is a student, looks like they've already taught a couple lessons and every lesson plan they're turning in looks like this. And you've given some sort of feedback on it and you felt that it was effective. But can you use questioning like, okay, there are no resources or references. Where did you get this material? Where did you get the Gettysburg Address? Okay, this is how you cite this and this. This is how I would cite if I found this article on this, or if I found the Gettysburg Address, or found another historical document. This is how I would cite. Now let's do this together. How would you cite the Gettysburg Address?
Now that's if you're with them, right?
Right.
Have a conversation with them, that's the other thing to consider. Because sometimes when we write and we say, well, a lot of times, and I'll do it online too, well, what next? Or what else? Or why did you say that? And then sometimes there's not enough information to follow up with that. I don't know why I said that. I said it because I thought that was the right thing to say, right? And so that's why you gotta be careful when you ask only questions, right? Because they may not know. You don't know what you don't know. So that's why you provide those feedback statements. Nicole, and then we're gonna move on.
This is not a little off of it, but with using references, if you go off and buy something offline, like my teacher uses Teachers Pay Teachers, do you still have to reference it if you bought it? Because then that becomes yours.
Yes, you need to go ahead and cite it. Because it's still, it may be yours, but it's not, you didn't create it. And even if you did create it, there's a way to cite yourself, right? If you go through a form, depending on what you're citing yourself for, right? That's when you start getting into more of the trickier APA stuff with, I'm trying to get the Al Purdue website. I think I sent you guys that link. That's a good one to look through as well. But I would probably just cite the Teachers Pay Teachers website. All right, so let's move on to Savannah. What did you guys notice about those feedback statements? First of all, let's talk about how you were writing out each one of those feedback statements. Was that difficult? Was it not difficult?
It's difficult to give. I think I heard Katie say to give negative feedback.
Okay.
Because to me, it's like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Okay.
But I guess it's on how you say it, how you frame it, so you don't hurt somebody's feelings. It's just corrective. You want to help them, because that's what feedback is.
So if I frame it with a negative, could I follow that up with some type of specific or corrective? And still, you feel good about that? Or just, no, we don't want to do negative at all?
No, I think negative is, it's okay. You just have to be careful how you say it. Don't be,
And the amount that you, I thought it was, yeah, so, and even the amount, because you do want to address some of the weaknesses, but you also want to address some of the strengths as well. You don't want to just solely go like with that one, right? It's easy to say, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you're missing this is wrong with it. And so we got to be careful about how the balance that we do. All right. Did anybody, all right, well, I'm going to pause that one. Any other observations about that one?
The two that did not meet and the one that met, they were all written in one big paragraph. But the one that exceeded, it had like multiple paragraphs.
Okay.
But it's also a different type of paper, persuasive versus informational. And that might be a topic that they've covered earlier in the year. It may be something that is more familiar. Third grade, you may have covered, I don't remember the standards, but you may have covered persuasive, in previous years where informational may be brand new, doing research may be brand new.
So you may not have caught this then. You said with the exceeds. That last paper was a persuasive paper, but look at the content of what the student wrote. Does it look like, Savannah, that the student is writing a persuasive paper?
then they're writing on the courts, not even about the topic.
Right. I really, so, yeah, I didn't read it.
Yeah.
I'm looking to it there. So really, that would be a great opportunity for you to provide some congruent feedback, because the topic, the task was, they were supposed to write, the task was writing a persuasive paper, but instead they wrote an informational paper.
Could you also give positive and congruent feedback with that? This would be a great informational paper. But your topic was.
Right. Absolutely. So these are two individuals providing feedback for individuals. Now we're looking at a class. There are several different things you could have pulled out from this. Okay, this is our first go around with it. What were a couple of things, Paul, I'll start with you. Some things that you really noticed about this. How would you provide feedback for these students? Either individually or as a class or as a group? How would you provide feedback?
As a class.
Okay.
Right here on my standards, I've shown that 50% did not get or 50% did get the standard NS5. More than 50% of the students right here, no, less than the 50% of students here acquired that topic or that standard. So I did it more informational based on the standard, on how the students overall are actually understanding the standards. Because if a student or the students, if the students as a whole aren't hitting it, then maybe that's something on the teacher's part. Maybe they're not teaching as far as what the standard needs to cover, because the students, obviously, majority of them, or just a few of them, know and don't know the standards of what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it.
So let me pause you there. Is that because you said even a few, and if you look at the first one, you said 50%. So would that be more of a class focus?
Yes. Anything around 50% and
Could that fall under a
more than
group
50%.
focus? Could that fall under a group focus? Because if half your class has got it, right? Couldn't I then do some differentiation and do maybe some parallel teaching and provide feedback for the other half?
The problem with that is although half passed, they're not all missing the same numbers and all hitting the same numbers. And it's not all the same standard and all not the same standard. They're missing and getting the same standards wrong and right all throughout.
Okay.
It's a mix.
So what should we do maybe at that point?
Probably reteaching of everything that's, maybe review. If that looks like it's maybe a big unit assessment, you might want to go back and kind of hit back over I think it was absolute value. You may want to do kind of a reteach over absolute value.
All right.
I noticed just an observation from the data that all of the ESOL students missed the written response problem.
Okay.
So maybe you would need to have maybe just personal communication to see maybe if the problem was, maybe their problem didn't lie within
The
them
math
knowing
part.
the actual writing part. So,
And there's one thing with doing feedback just based on whole class. A lot of the high achieving students did not pass. And if you give whole class just 50% of you did not pass, they're going to panic because they half of them may not, or some of them passed and some of them didn't. And just high achieving versus gifted, they may immediately panic. And, okay, I'm not one of them, even though they may not be one of them. Or on the flip side, maybe one of them is like, oh, I got this because I always make A's. But they may actually have a problem with the content.
Paul, you want to finish any final thoughts with that one?
Just looking at the data overall, the students do not. A reteaching on all of those standards would actually benefit. Because based on this, even though you had your student ESL, OL, they still hit other targets and then still had other, like the selected responses, they still have right here just as many wrong selected responses as they do written. So it could just be overall for that student. And looking at the class, 11 out of 22 actually passed. The highest grade is, I think, a 95, and the lowest grade is a 45, no 40. So you have a curve from 45 to 90 where no one in the class is at mastery. 50 of your class is, probably majority of your class here is failing or didn't even reach a 70 mark.
So we're going to talk about mastery a little bit later. That's why we have the initial piece, because for this student, she's saying if you're at 70%, you've mastered what she's asking. Okay. So that's a great conversation, Paul. I'm glad you brought that up for us to continue on at a later time, because what is mastery, right? And maybe it's 100%, maybe it's 95, maybe it's 70. What constitutes that? Well, we're going to look at that a little bit more closely. Think about when you have to write your objectives. Now it's going to start to make sense of, well, oh, okay, now there's that measurable piece, right? Because the students didn't hit that target. Now I can provide an opportunity for reteaching.
On that same line, the class that I'm in, they are struggling to hit around that 70%. I am teaching the students that Mr. Hunt was talking about that are in that 60 percentile on a good day. So if they could hit that 70%, that is true mastery for them. So I feel that data for my students.
There's a lot we're going to do with data. We'll start really breaking it down, but that's kind of where we're going. So I do want to stop us here. We're over time again. If you will, just collect the papers in your section. If you'll bring them up here and just put them in a nice little file for me. The last thing I want you to do is your download E, okay? This is more feedback practices overall, okay? Just check off how you're doing with each one of those, okay? And that's going to be what you'll leave with me, all right? And so while you're doing that, let me go over your homework. Okay, let me just touch on it. We're going to take our midterm next Monday. You have a study guide that's in there for you to cover the concepts that we talked about at this point. It will be a written response. Okay, so you'll bring, you can bring your laptop up. If you decide you'd rather type it up, that's fine. I want to go ahead and the way that I had it planned out is I want to get this out of the way, because when we start talking about performance assessment in here, that's going to lead us into actually doing good lesson number 6. I think it's either before or after your spring break. I have to double check. And so that way we don't have to worry about the midterm. Okay. So that's your homework. Study for next week. You don't have anything to do other than just studying for that. And before you head out, fill this out. Let me see your checkoff sheet, okay, and your hours, and we are free to go.
Paul, do you have that one with you?
I have it on my laptop. I don't have it physically.
So you pull that one out for me, and you have that, and actually, I'm gonna say no, because we have a presidential candidate who is on campus,